A report from the UN accuses the Syrian government of using chemical weapons against civilians. It also blames the armed forces for a sarin gas attack back in April in Idlib province. Paula Sleer has more on that report.
The United Nations Syria Commission has issued a report in which it found that there was a chemical attack that was carried out back in April in Idlib, and that those responsible were government forces using sarin gas against the civilian population. They based their conclusions first and foremost on interviews with eyewitnesses, victims, and medical workers. They also used videos and photographs. But what is important is that the investigators themselves did not travel to the scene of this attack. And neither did the investigators of a previous report that was conducted by the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, the OPCW. And the findings of the OPCW report were also used by the UN commissioners this time around. But what is also important here is that the OPCW report did not assign blame. It really was investigating whether or not this attack took place. So what this means is that the question of who is to blame, who is responsible, is still open. Now, the United Nations report did not only focus on this alleged chemical strike, it also looked at the question of civilian casualties due to the coalition airstrikes in Syria. And what is not clear is why they mixed these two topics together, particularly because the coalition civilian deaths constitute an important part of the report, and they are based on solid evidence, not least because that evidence is coming from the coalition forces themselves. They have a detailed look at several cases that are confirmed by the coalition forces, and you have the coalition admitting to killing more than 600 civilians, although activists say that that number goes into the thousands. Now, a huge chunk of this UN report is devoted to this question of civilian deaths caused by the coalition forces, and only right at the end of the report is there mention about this chemical attack. And yet, despite this, on Twitter, the United Nations has called this a report into the use of chemical weapons in Khan Shaykhun, and not a report into civilian casualties that were caused by the coalition forces in Syria.
Well, this report deals with a number of issues, and arguably the majority of the report, the main emphasis of the report, is on the what it suggests are unnecessary or excessive civilian casualties caused by primarily US airstrikes around Raqqa, for example, and even in Idlib province earlier this year. It talks about a specific strike on a mosque which it found, which it says actually happened and caused unnecessary civilian casualties. Almost as an extra item, it talks about the Khan Shaykhun attack. It mentions that, or it blames the Syrian Air Force for that. But when we look at media coverage of this in the West, it's almost certainly will fit into what we've seen as a consistent pattern over the entire span of the Syria war and indeed other conflicts.
Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel is travelling around the country.
We're just a few weeks away when you speak to people on the streets here. However, Angela Merkel's campaign visits to areas with strong right-wing support have certainly provided some moments of, well, that excitement we've been lacking. Here she is in Brandenburg. And whistles for the German Chancellor there. She had said that she would specifically be going to areas that had strong support for parties like Alternative for Germany, the anti-immigration party that's set themselves up as particularly being an anti-Angela Merkel party. She said she's going to go out and see these people, and she has done, and, well, has received a torrent of abuse when she's gone there. She didn't, however, on Wednesday night receive the same type of, harassment as she saw on Tuesday in Heidelberg, when, alongside the whistles and boos, 2 tomatoes were thrown at Angela Merkel as she took the stage there. Thankfully, a bright red blazer worn by the German Chancellor to hide any stains. It apparently hit her hip as she was making her way to the stage. Unfortunately, one of the moderators, well, she was hit and splattered with the fruit, Angela Merkel offering her a handkerchief. And interestingly enough, during the rally, she was asked the question, what do you think's your biggest strength? And she said, without making reference to the tomatoes, that she was calm under pressure. But we did have hopes that this was going to be a hard-fought campaign between Angela Merkel and former European Parliament President Martin Schulz of the Social Democratic Party, but it hasn't panned out that way. As it stands at the moment, Angela Merkel around 15% ahead, depending on who you speak to, with only just weeks to go and it not looking like the Social Democrats are going to catch her up anytime soon.
A member of the Alternative for Germany party told us Angela Merkel has no vision for solving the key problems facing the country.
In reality, she's not leading. She's waiting until a certain line comes up and then she's following that line. We have the United Nations migration settlement program, which is, I believe, 20 years old. And she's following that line. She's following an international agenda which is not made up for and by the German people. And we are not a rich country anymore. This is becoming a failed state. We are going into becoming a third world country.
The US government is pushing for the extradition of a Russian national accused of cybercrime and money laundering. Alexander Vinnik was arrested in Greece on the 25th of July at the request of the US Justice Department. He's accused of using the Bitcoin trading website BTCE to launder more than $4 billion. The Greek authorities are currently considering the extradition request. Mr. Vinnik spoke by phone from prison in his first interview since his arrest.
I would say they are mistaken. I don't have any planes, yachts, or any other luxury possessions. First, because I haven't done anything illegal. Second, I don't understand what the US has to do with me, and why they should be judging a Russian citizen.
The Russian Foreign Ministry has said it is closely monitoring the situation, and the priority is to ensure that the suspect's rights are respected. Mr. Vinnik's wife, Alexandra, also spoke to RT, giving further details about her husband's detention.
I turned around and saw that my husband was surrounded by around 20 men. 20 men wearing T-shirts and sunglasses took part in his arrest. He was handcuffed. Our children were there at the time. These men walked him away. They also took mobile phones and the key to our hotel room from my bag. As far as I know, they searched the room. Me and my children were kept on the beach from 11 in the morning until 7 p.m. under the supervision of 3 men. We couldn't leave. The children didn't get anything to eat at all. As far as I know from the documents sent from the US, the BTC's activities were against the law there. The document says the managers knew they were creating a platform for money laundering because it wasn't registered, it didn't have a license, and because such business models allow criminals to use the exchange. All the charges are being made based on this statement. By this way of thinking, you could make the manufacturers of frying pans, for example, guilty because wives hid their husbands with them. It's the same thing. Obviously, his return to Russia is my main goal. My husband agrees to be extradited only to Russia and no other country. He wants to come home to his family, to his children.
2 men have been arrested in a suburb of Paris on suspicion of plotting a terror attack. The news comes just hours after it was revealed that Spanish and Moroccan authorities detained 6 people with alleged ISIL links. Charlotte Dubensky has been following events.
2 men have been arrested and will be charged with terrorism offences. The men were arrested in an apartment in the south suburb of Paris called Villejuif. Now, what we understand is that a maintenance worker or a plumber had been in the apartment fixing a problem there and had alerted the authorities to suspicious materials in that apartment. Now, when the police raided that apartment, they found materials that could be used to make explosives and bombs, such as gas canisters and wires. Now, Now, the situation becomes even trickier when we understand that one of the men arrested apparently has admitted during his questioning in custody that he had been selling bulletproof vests to another man who is a suspect in a murder case here in France, and he's also under suspicion of planning terror activities against churches here in France. Well, that's the latest on the situation here in France. Meanwhile, Spanish forces have arrested 6 people who are alleged to have links with ISIL or Islamic State. We understand that one of those arrests took place in Melilla, a city which is in the Spanish territory next to Morocco, and the other arrests took place in Morocco. Of those 6 suspects, 5 are Moroccans and 1 is said to be a Spaniard. And what we understand is those individuals were arrested today suspected of being involved with ISIL or Islamic State. And we understand from police sources that the suspects had been holding nightly meetings, including holding training sessions in which they were simulating assassinations. That's come from police sources. But we have also heard from the police that there were no apparent links between this alleged terror cell in the city of Melilla and the terror cell that carried out those attacks just a few weeks ago in Barcelona and in Cambrils on the mainland of Spain.
You're watching RT International with me, Rosanna Lockwood. I'll be back with a roundup of the headlines in just 30 minutes' time. Stay with us.
Financial survival guide. I don't buy eggs. I buy omelet futures. Hey, that's not an omelet, that's a fried egg. That's the last time I buy eggs from the future. Don't crack up. Watch Kaiser Report.
We're going underground as today Russian President Vladimir Putin and the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe meet to discuss Korea in Vladivostok. Coming up in the show, is a mafia-like cartel turning the screws behind Brexit? Franco Frattini, Italy's former foreign minister, gives us a cautionary tale of how a Paris-Washington-Berlin conspiracy brought down the Italian government, and his take on Britain's post-Brexit survival. And is ISIS the new One Direction for some British Muslims? We speak to award-winning stand-up comedian Shazia Mirza about blaming the Kardashians for young British women joining ISIS-Daesh as her international tour kicks off at Ilkley Literature Festival in the next few weeks.
Plus, from the headlines, we reveal Hillary Clinton's curious combination of fact and spin, and the royal father-to-be who's great with a chopper.
All this and more coming up in today's Going Underground. But first, UK Prime Minister Theresa May, after no doubt congratulating Princess Diana's son on siring another baby, will be protesting nuclear proliferation on the Korean peninsula at today's Prime Minister's questions. That's despite her proliferation of nuclear missiles, for all we know, off the coast of Pyongyang on submarines which she says she would order to fire to kill millions. She is previous on supporting British catastrophic foreign policy, and it's in that context that she will answer questions with seemingly no answers about the ongoing Brexit negotiations. Before the summer holidays, Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson said the EU should go whistle if it wanted money from the UK.
Go whistle is an entirely appropriate expression.
Well, the EU's chief negotiator has replied to Johnson and the Tories.
I'm not hearing any whistling, just the clock ticking.
And as the clock ticks, who better to explain the mafia-like power of European leaders than Italy's former foreign minister and someone who, like Barnier, has served as an EU commissioner, than Judge Franco Frattini. He was also a candidate to be NATO Secretary General, and he joins me now from Rome. Franco, thanks so much for coming on the show. What's Michel Barnier like? What do you expect him to tell the UK when Brexit negotiations resume in 10 days or so?
I know Michel very well. He used to be my colleague as foreign minister, used to be my colleague around the table of European Commission. He's a very tough negotiator. 2 points that have to be taken into consideration. One thing is to defend European interests while negotiating a framework agreement or a number of agreements that are not to the detriment to European citizens. Other thing that would be wrong would be to punish UK. I think Michel will go along that line, defending Europe while not punishing UK.
Very, very diplomatic response. Barnier, of course, was appointed to the French cabinet under Sarkozy, and some alarming accusations, should one put it, from Obama's former Treasury Secretary, Tim Geithner, saying Sarkozy, Merkel, Sarkozy being Barnier's boss, sought to conspire to overthrow your then leader, Silvio Berlusconi.
I can surely exclude Michel Barnier being a part of that game. Sarkozy was part, for sure, because the former Treasury Secretary said something that I lived through at the time as Italian Foreign Minister, particularly during the G20 summit in Nice under the presidency of President Sarkozy. The trio, Sarkozy, Lagarde, and Merkel,
Christine Lagarde,
they tried to push over the Italian government to accept the monetary fund and to accept in Italy the so-called Troika. Berlusconi vehemently refused such a possibility and opportunity that would have been a nightmare for Italy. At that moment, according to what the former Treasury Secretary is telling in his book, Obama said, I cannot go farther. I cannot impose. He even said, I don't want to have my hands with the blood of Mr. Berlusconi. He said.
Okay, Sarkozy is gone, but Angela Merkel is still there. Lagarde, of course, is still there. I mean, are you saying that these sorts of people conspire to overthrow Italian democracy? Because Merkel is still there. She's a strong part in this Brexit negotiation.
In that moment, Merkel became much more prudent and hesitant. Sarkozy was not hesitant anyway. Merkel said, if there is a refusal from the Italian government, we cannot impose, as you say, manu militari, the presence of Troika. And this is why that didn't happen with Italy. Then the government of Mr. Monti came. This is the recent year, the past year's history. But that attempt failed because before that, Mr. Obama, and after that, Mrs. Merkel became reluctant, following the very strong position from Berlusconi. This was one of the reasons why our government fell down, because of the speculation, because of the spread, but there have been such as attempt to impose Troika in Italy. Fortunately, we did not accept.
And it's now 2 years since the body of 3-year-old Kurdish refugee Alan Kurdi washed up on the shores of Europe, a testament to the fact that your and your leader Berlusconi's policies from Libya to Syria as regards what the EU is doing have been vindicated?
I think what happened in the latest year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, last year, this year, was very detrimental for Italy and for Europe as a whole. There was a wrong policy concerning immigration and refugees crisis. Italy has been left alone, no doubt. Only now, with the new president of France, with the new position taken by Merkel, Germany, things are moving in the right direction, but only because the current government of Italy, and particularly the Minister of Interior, Mr. Minniti, and the Prime Minister Gentiloni are doing what we used to say years and years ago. We have to help before they reach the Italian shores, not after. This was their serious mistake, doing nothing until they reach Sicily. When they reach Sicily, they are in Italy, they are in Europe. Now they are working on the origin countries, on the transit countries, by promoting a pre-screening of aspirant migrants and refugees to understand who are entitled to reach Europe and who are not. This is the right policy, but unfortunately it took years and years for the affirmation of this very simple principle. This is an European problem. This is not a Sicilian or an Italian issue.
Difficult for a united European Union then, given the behavior of Germany and other countries towards Italy during this horrific refugee crisis?
Well, I think Germany realized the dramatic impact of refugees crisis only when they saw the squares of Munich and the squares of Vienna full of migrants sleeping in the squares and in the streets, arriving through the so-called Balkan route. Never before they had realized the real dramatic impact that they suffered for years in Sicily, in Campania, in Rome, in the north of Italy. Only suddenly they realized, this is a problem also for Austria, also for Hungary, also for Germany. In that moment, they said, is the moment to open the doors to channel migration and refugees through legal ways, legal channels, by helping transit countries like Turkey or origin countries like Chad or Niger or Nigeria. Only at that moment, Merkel changed her opinion on that. Fortunately, she changed, but very late.
Okay, let alone, apart from those African countries and the cork that Libya was, arguably, of course, Syria. Trump has cut off funding for the CIA-backed Islamists that are trying to overthrow Assad. How big a mistake was it of people like Theresa May to support the White Helmets and other Islamists to overthrow Assad in Syria?
Look, Italy had been requested many times to provide weapons to so-called rebels. We always refuse that request coming from President Obama's United States, because they used to respond, who are they? Who are they? Are they real defending liberty and rights, or are also jihadist group ready to transform their fight for liberty in another jihadist action? Unfortunately, we were right and America was wrong in providing weapons, in helping, in giving money, because those Sunni rebels proved to be jihadists, linked to Al-Nusra, linked to Al-Qaeda, and so on and so forth. Obama administration made a number of mistakes in Syria. Trump administration is showing still unclear position. The only positive thing to do is to work in coordination with the Russian Federation on the ground.
Well, NATO policy, if it has been indeed helping those so-called moderate rebels, sees the enemy as Russia. If you had become Secretary General of NATO instead of Jens Stoltenberg, what would you be saying about the threat posed from Russia to the EU?
Russia is not a threat at all to the European Union. We are looking now at serious international crises, the latest one, the North Korean nuclear proliferation. We have been looking at the proliferation of Daesh, and we have been fighting in a Cold War atmosphere against the Russian Federation. that, on the contrary, is one of the strongest partners in fighting Daesh and stabilizing Middle East. So it has been a mistake made by NATO. It has been a mistake by refraining from a good cooperation and going ahead with the old strategy of containment policy. I was one of those who signed the Pratica di Mare agreement when Bush and Putin shake their hands and said, in the future, we will be cooperating always against terrorism. Unfortunately, Pratica di Mare summit is in the past, and the current situation is much more dangerous.
Franco Frattini, thank you. After the break. From Russia with love, but is it from Saint-Tropez? Why award-winning stand-up comedian Shazia Mirza thinks the Cold War is being waged not on Baltic borders, but the white sandy beaches of the Côte d'Azur.
And from the headlines, we explore a politically paralysed province and the war games, which may not be war games much longer.
All this and more coming up in part 2 of Going Underground.
Years ago, I travelled across the United States, exploring America's deadly love affair with the gun.
If a bad guy tried to get to one of my family members, he would have better luck with a butter knife against a grizzly bear than hurting one of my babies.
Since my book was published in the year 2000, more than 500,000 Americans have been killed by firearms in the USA.
We had a SWAT team, yes we did. Yes, this was in middle school. We go through drills and we put ourselves in real scenarios. It was interesting to see who actually got hit by the paintball gun.
I decided to return to the subject, to track down each gun owner who I'd met and photographed those years ago.
I don't know the answer, but we are not the problem.
Jambo la kwanza, tukianzisha mafunzo, tuna jambo ambalo tunaita the definition, sio? Ambaye ni kujikinga ni nini? Sawa?
Sasa mimi nikusirika sababu kila saa ikimkuta ukikutana na yeye ananiambia twende kwa yeye. Haiwezekani. No.
Ya ngumi kugonga wapi? Hapa kwa shingo. Ama tunaweza tuka kugonga wapi? Pia hapa. Sawa?
Nasikia hasira imekuwa mingi. Halafu sasa inabidi badala ani-face na mtokea upande nimgonge hapa. Kigonga.
This was because the rape incidents in Korokocho were very high for the grannies.
Welcome back. The mass killing of civilians by the US-UK coalition continues in Syria, something that may not be so emphasized by today's report published in Geneva on human rights violations in that country. But every one of the tens of thousands of airstrikes by RAF and US planes represents profits for the arms trade, something that will be brought into sharp relief as London hosts its largest arms fair next week. Difficult questions over Britain's arms trade, let alone arguably Theresa May trying to sell weapons to Saudi Arabia's foreign minister Adel Al-Jubeir in Downing Street recently, are often put to one side in mainstream media. Instead, there's arguably the demonization of Islam and Muslims. One award-winning stand-up comedian and actor, Shazia Mirza, sets out to deconstruct the myths of mainstream narratives, and we caught up with her at the Edinburgh Fringe, where she launched her new show, With Love from Saint-Tropez. It tours internationally until May 2018. I'm in a noisy Gilded Balloon Theatre in Edinburgh with the comedian Shazia Mirza, and your new comedy show that's touring all around the country, maybe around the world.
Around the world, yeah.
Obliquely addresses the problem of Russian infiltration around the world.
Russian infiltration everywhere. I mean, my show is called With Love from Saint-Tropez, and the Russians are just everywhere. I've been on holiday to south of France, Greece, India, Pakistan. It's full of Russians. The whole world is turning Russian. They're even running the American government. They're everywhere.
I'm not sure that's exactly true.
No, it is true.
Now, you are famous for having to change the titles of your shows for fear of death and your venues in which you do your shows being
I hope
destroyed.
I'm not going to die. Are people going to kill me in Russia when they've heard about what I've said about them in my shows?
We'll have to get comment from the Russian embassy on this, of course, in Britain.
My last show that I did was called The Kardashians Made Me Do It. And it was a satire about ISIS. It's about why I thought that young girls were going to join ISIS, which is because I think that they think that the men are hot, which a lot of them are. You know, they see these men and go, oh, yeah, he's a bit of all right. Oh, yeah, macho, hairy, got guns. Oh, yeah.
The One Direction for some young Muslim women.
I think, seriously, it was sexual. I don't think it's anything to do with religion or politics. And I called it, the Kardashians Made Me Do It. Because when these three girls first left to go to Syria, their parents were called into the government by Britain and said, why have your daughter's gone to Syria? And the sister said, I can't understand why she's gone. She used to watch the Kardashians, And that is what they told the government of our country.
Clear cause and effect.
I mean, I blame the Kardashians for everything, but not ISIS.
You used to call it... So is that the same show that used to be called The Road to Baghdadi?
It used to be called The Road to al-Baghdadi after, the
founder of ISIS.
Founder of ISIS,
So called.
So called, yeah. Self-appointed.
And but the theatre told you that they might...
They were worried that they might get killed. So they said, can you tone it down? So I changed it to The Kardashians Made Me Do It. So now they've got the Kardashians after them, which is a lot more serious.
Do you know of any other comedy shows in the past 50 years that have had this problem?
I do, yeah. I think Reginald D. Hunter had a lot of controversy with the titles of his shows. People, because he used the N-word in some of the titles of his shows, so he got a lot of stick from people.
You've commented previously that, because everyone knows the Jewish contribution to humour is disproportionate and in comedy, and you said that it's about laughing through dark times and that it's the Muslims' turn now.
I thought you were going to say the Jewish contribution to terrorism. I was thinking, that's a new one.
I'm going to start on that. No, but what do you mean about comedy during dark times in that way?
Well, obviously we are living in a dark time, not just the way we look, but it is a dark time generally, Trump and everything, and Russia running America now. I mean, it's very serious business.
The Russian government does deny that. But anyway, go on, yeah.
Of course, Russia denies everything, but they are infiltrating everywhere. I mean, not just in our sushi, but they're on our beaches, and they're in our governments, they're in our politics, and they're everywhere. There was a time when people used to say that about us. God, they're everywhere. Now it's the Russians. God, they're everywhere.
Okay, what about what happens to a young comedian's career when they keep making jokes at the expense of
they die by the
countries
Kremlin.
like Saudi Arabia? Okay, let's go to Saudi Arabia. Do you ever think that, it may not be a great idea to make jokes against one of Britain's closest partners,
the thing is, ISIS are not really fans of my comedy. They don't like a laugh. They don't really like a bit of a joke and a humour like that. They're not really into comedy, and they never really come to my shows. And so they don't even know what I'm doing, which is great.
On the news, journalists know that there have been British attempts to overthrow the government of Syria, obviously.
Yes.
Why is it in the Real Housewives of ISIS, which you were involved in?
I'm not in the Real Housewives of ISIS.
I know.
No, I'm still single. I'm not involved in the Housewives of ISIS. ISIS don't want me.
Would it have been too
much?
They
don't want a wife who's a comedian. I've tried. I've tried.
We are watched, by the way, in areas where battles are going on against ISIS. So, they can always write in if they
can't write.
About
These people are not educated. They can't read. They can't write. They've got no sense of humour. They don't have sex. They don't have relationships. That's why they're blowing people up.
Well, we'll invite ISIS to come on and try and refute those claims. Greg Dyke, the former Director General of the BBC, said that the state-mandated BBC is hideously white. That's 16 years ago since the Director General said that.
White.
Is it much better now? My question was, is it much better for an Asian woman in Britain?
Oh my God, it's whiter than white. The problem is, I mean, I think I'm white. I mean, this is a problem. You know, I go on stage and I think I'm white, and I talk like I'm white, and I'm totally unaware of my colour till I don't get gigs and jobs, and then I realise I'm not white.
Of course, there were salaries recently released at the BBC.
Mine wasn't. Mine didn't make the list.
Can you really expect much about women of colour getting a look in when it was white women that were... The scandal was about over there.
Well, this is
pay at the BBC.
The thing is, I know I've got some friends who work at the BBC, Asian women, and you know what Asians are like. They don't just do one job.
Not cleaning, broadcasting.
No, they're broadcasting. They've been promoted now, and the thing is, you don't really see an Asian woman doing one job. She does 10 because she loves working. It's the Asian work ethic. I know. I've got a friend. She presents 5 different programs on TV, radio. She didn't even make the list. And her father is really disappointed because the dad's like, why are you not on the list? All the white women are on there. What happened, you failure? You know, so we need to